What's up, you guys? This is Dart Shredder for the Podcast of Everything, recording from the Podcast of Everything studios in beautiful ENC region of the United States. I am your host. Today we're going to be doing a financial literacy episode that's going to help my college and high school students prepare themselves for both entering college with financial preparedness and smart saving and spending strategies, and is also going to help my post-college students who are entering the workforce prepare themselves on budgeting and finance that can actually help them be better prepared to enter the workforce and have a better spending habit for both themselves, and maybe not just themselves, but maybe if they have any people who are going to be joining them on this journey as they leave college. This can also help them as well to balance their spending and be better prepared. If you guys have not donated to the podcast already, you guys can donate to the podcast. You guys can visit anchor.fm/TPOE/support. That's anchor.fm/TPOE/support. And you guys can also leave a message by going to anchor.fm/TPOE/message, and that will give you the access that you guys need to either donate, recurring donations, or send in a message. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with today's episode. So some people who are exiting college or who are exiting high school and entering college might not necessarily have all the key knowledge that is necessary for them to be prepared to enter the workforce, and some of you guys may already have high school based jobs and might not be getting paid substantial amounts, because naturally high school and mid-college jobs are usually only low-wage jobs, and that they pay hourly and not salary-based, and so it can become very tricky, if not very frustrating, with your finances until you get your degree to be able to manage that money and be able to, use it to effectively, because you never know, you might not get enough, you might get enough and still not have enough to live on your own off of it. And so this really just helps you guys with better spending habits in the long run. So the better spending habits technique that I have for you guys is called the 50-50 method, and this is really a method that I personally developed that has worked for me, and I thought I'd share that might help. The other method, of course, is actually 50-30-20, and I will discuss that at the very end. So the 50-50 method is basically for every paycheck or every monthly allowance you get, you split it up 50% into your spending cash and 50% into your savings cash. For example, if you have a savings account and a spending account, and you have $140, you would take 70 of it and put it into spending money, and then you would have to take the other 70 and put into savings money. Now keep in mind, some people's paychecks might be larger and some people's paychecks might be smaller, so finding the formula that works best for you is a good idea. This formula doesn't necessarily work for everybody, but it can help for several reasons. One of the main reasons why I use this formula is because, with me particularly, monthly allowance on top of my paycheck, and since I get paid every 2 weeks, using some really weird math, I can actually set aside half of my monthly allowance and then set aside the other half in savings, and then prolong that money to make it last me 2 weeks until I get my actual paycheck from the monthly allowance, and then split that into 50-50. And the goal of this really is that by the time you get out of college, or by the time you get your degree and whatnot, the hope is that by using the 50-50 method and not touching the savings 50%, or touching it as little as possible, it's not guaranteed, but it helps to know that it actually allows you to kind of create like a bubble of cash, or like a stockpile of cash on the side, while still being able to keep up with your spending. And since high school students and some college students live with their parents and don't have to foot like 10 to 12 bills, and they only have to pay for like maybe like subscriptions or whatnot if they have any, or maybe you just don't have to pay for anything at all, especially if you have scholarships for college, then that all in its own helps, because you can still save your money, be able to spend money out with your friends and whatnot, and all the while being able to save that stockpile. That's the 50/50 method, and that method is, well, it's not really well known, and it really only works if you have a system like I do or some others do, where they have monthly allowance on top of your paycheck allowance. But if you only have your paycheck allowance, this is where the 50/30/20 comes in. The 50 is needs, the 30 is wants, and the 20 is savings. Now, my personal recommendation is to take that 30% and turn that into savings, and take that 20% and turn that into wants. The reason why it's said that if 30% is wants and the 20% is savings is because that's based on the assumption that you're making between a little over $100 to maybe $300 every 2 weeks. That's under that assumption. But for most people, it's usually either 150, especially high school students, it's usually a lot less than that. So flipping the 30 with the 20 and putting 20 over 30, using 20% for wants and 30% for savings, is actually better for especially if you have less, because those wants and those expenditures, those actually, you don't necessarily have to do them. And if you really wanted to, you could cut them out entirely, and then that would essentially make it a 50/50 method. You don't have to do it, but if you cut them out entirely, that does turn it into a 50/50 method. So that's something else that can also help as well. My other tip for this episode is, whatever you do, if you have to spend on going out or doing something like that, find ways to save money wherever you can. Like if you have the McDonald's app and you have to eat at McDonald's, well, let's just say they have a deal where you can get a $2 breakfast sandwich. You don't have to get $6 worth of stuff. So if you absolutely have to eat a breakfast and you have water bottles or drinks at home, just bring water bottles and drinks from home and just spend the $2. It's not gonna hurt. It's not gonna hurt as bad as opposed to paying $10 for a whole meal, when you could actually just spend $2 and be done with it. Especially if you're on a tight and fixed income, which almost every high school and college student and some seniors actually are. And the reason why I threw some seniors into the mix is because seniors are only on Social Security, and so they do get substantially more. I will say that, but they can't. But most of them are still count on fixed income. So that's why I threw them in there. And mainly for them, they've already been through this, so they don't have to learn it again. So I'm just gonna skip over that part for now. The one thing that I will say is that if you guys have any problems with spending habits that you guys just can't break, maybe it's a good idea to just start finding free stuff to do. And if you absolutely can stay out of the stores altogether, can actually break that spending habit to a degree. And for my online people, because I know there are a lot of there's also an online spending habit. Online spending habits can be easily remedied, but it's also tricky on the internet, because your friends, especially if you have social media, they might post something and then you want it so badly, and then that can contribute. So maybe taking a social media break and also dodging Amazon altogether might be for about 2 to 3 weeks might be a good idea. If you absolutely cannot do that and you cannot break your spending habits, if you guys absolutely have to see a therapist, then that's always a good idea too. And there's also this thing called the bank, where you might not think about going to the bank as, a cure for spending habits, but I'm going to tell you why going to the bank might not be such a bad idea. Because they're actually fine if you set up meetings, or if you say go to the bank in person and request to speak to a money manager or somebody at the bank who might not be at the front desk, and might say there might be a banker that might not be busy, or they might not be at the front desk, and there's like somebody there who can talk to you, like those who handle the investment accounts in the back offices, or even the financial loan offices. Just for reference, you can actually there's nothing wrong with walking to the bank and requesting to speak with them about finding financial spending tips. And you never know, you might be able to get a banker or somebody at the bank to actually sit down with you and talk about it. Granted, they're not going to sit there with you for like an hour, but maybe a good 10 to 15 minutes with the banking person never would hurt. And it's always a good idea to talk to somebody rather than nobody. The reason why I recommend talking to a banker over a psychiatrist is because the psychiatrist can do a psychological portion of it, but they can't actually give you the monetary portion of it. The bankers know more about the money itself than most therapists do. So the therapist can supplement it with the psychological approach, but the banker has the keys and the tips that can actually over supplement what the therapist is going to tell you after you visit the banker. And they can actually even guide you into your spending as it relates to your account. Because if you go to the bank where your account is held, and you present them with the financials of your account, they might actually be able to give you a plan based upon the amount of money that you actually have in your account. So I actually do recommend not only seeing a therapist, but you could also go to the bank, quite honestly, because they know more about this. Now don't go there, and if they tell you no, keep bothering them until they speak with you, because that's going to get you just kicked out. But if you really have to speak to a banker, I don't see why you can't go there and talk to somebody about that at the bank, since they know the money. And furthermore about the financial thing, my last tip and portion of this episode is really that, especially for those who who are well off, or even those who are not well off. Think about it when you complain about your finances, think about it in terms of this quote right here. It could always be worse. Think about it in terms of it could always be worse, because you have to remember, while one person might have $25,000, another person might have $5,000 or might have nothing at all. So when you complain about your own finances, I'm not saying look down on people who don't have the money. I'm saying, think about it as it could always be worse, and that in the fact that, and when you start complaining, and then that actually tells your mind, okay, hey, if I want to prevent myself from ending up with almost no money, or if not no money at all, then instead of complaining about my finances, I need to just be thankful that I have my finances and work to make it better, not worse. Now, granted, sometimes that does cause people to look down on people who don't have those finances, and that's mainly for some people who just slip into that idea. And that's the only issue there is with the only downside to having that argument about it could always be worse is that it's okay to tell yourself that once or twice, But to the point where you start telling yourself that over and over again, to the point where you start flexing money on people who don't have it, then that becomes a problem. So maybe tell yourself that sparingly, but don't like convince yourself or like force yourself into believing that all the way the 100 yards, because if you do, you might corrupt your thinking into believing that you are better than somebody else, and then that causes problems in its own. So there's also a downside to telling yourself that. I just thought I'd make a note of of that as well, because there are some people who do that, fall into that rabbit hole, and then they think that they're better. They end up doing a bunch of stupid stuff, and then they do end up in the same boat as somebody else. So that's so you have to be willing and ready to avoid that at all costs. Okay, so anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this short 16-minute episode. I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up. Again, if you guys have not donated already, you guys really should consider donating. It's not really required, it's not asked much of you, but if you guys like donate even like 99 cents a month, it really helps a lot. You guys can also send in your messages to me. I'm gonna leave a link in the description as well. And season 2 is off to a great start so far. And another thing is, if you guys would like to email me, you guys can email my podcast at tpoe.contact@gmail.com. That is all for me. I will hopefully hear some of your amazing voices in the next episode.